In the baths, I was tended to by yet more servants dressed in white. Two came on either side to undress me, while a third waited by the water, dipping her fingers to test its warmth, and occasionally mixing in another handful of spices, dried fruits, and flower petals. They were trained like the high Kelson castron in the art of silent service, though the silence of these men was likely willful. I doubted the Harthara cut their tongues. Her cruelties, where she showed them, were far subtler in taste. They hesitated when they saw the wounds in my stomach, the ones which had only barely closed shut, far from healed. My abdomen, sides, and back were elaborately painted with the twisted, puckered flesh of scars from every wound I'd ever had to treat, sew, and bandage myself. I considered it my luck I was a master of temperance, or else their prolonged stares might well have evoked a sense of shame. Though, when they touched me gently on the back to guide me into the water, I realized I'd misjudged their apprehension. It wasn't horror or disgust on their faces, but pity. Their own bodies were smooth and well washed, uninjured, unscarred, and simply beautiful in all those human ways I couldn't be anymore. I didn't long to be like them, yet I didn't wish to be like myself either. As in all things, I wanted for nothing. Step by step, we lowered into the great square bath until the water was up to my thigh, and I sat on a long bench in the center. Behind me, a trough flowed with steaming hot water from which the servants dipped cups to pour over my head, shoulders, and back. Using rough sea stones, they scrubbed away layers on layers of oil, dirt, and old skin until I was raw and soft all over. They were attentive to detail, sure to clean between my fingers and toes, the places behind my ears, the soft parts inside my knees and elbows. And for a long while I let myself drift away with the steam's steady rise, filled with the air of peaches, water lilies, and thyme. Some hour later, I found myself on the same bench, alone but for one remaining servant who sat patiently on her knees by the water lever. Only a ghost of the steam remained, a thin fog just over the surface, and the trough once flowing was now dry. I may have fallen asleep, I figured, or else I slipped into a state so temperate my mind really did leave the world. The Harthara's just returned from the city, said the servant. She's delighted you're here, and she'll be waiting for you in the conservatory whenever you're ready. I nodded. I'm ready. Very well, then. She stood and brought me a drying cloth from a table on the far wall, and she patted me dry once and again until only my hair retained a slight dampness. Shall I tie it for you? She asked. The Harthara suggested a palarin braid. Did she now? That's just as well, I suppose. She nodded and took to weaving a few locks on the right side, then secured it tight with a fine beaded cord. They were only glass beads, but they had the distinctive twinkle of aquamarine, and for a moment I worried the Harthara might know too much of me. But that was impossible. There was nothing at all to know. The clothes they procured for me were much finer and more comfortable than I was accustomed to. A silken blouse with drawstring sleeves dyed a rich myrtle green, a pair of burnt umber breeches, and flat-soled leather shoes with black ribbon ties. Donning them, I could see the Har's influence over the estate's every last machination, as though the goings-on of the great house were natural extensions of her inner being, part and parcel with her will itself. There was no separation between her servant's choice of color from the Har's implicit command of it. It was all a wordless, seamless exercise in perfect harmony. It was a harmony owed to the most mysterious of virtues, one which eluded all attempts at precise examination and destroyed those who sought to master it. It could be called a unity, though perhaps it was imagined better in the common mind as love or acceptance. The true word for it was irita, a term used only in ancient Kelson texts for the uninterruptible flow of the Weva, the oneness of the world. Even the wise could only attune themselves to it by accident, and the few who ever mastered it were fools, every one. It was beyond me to know whether the Harthara was wise or a fool, but it was doubtless her influence was inseparable from the natural order. She was neither wholly a shepherd of peace nor an usher of chaos. She devoted no more effort to changing the world than she did to preserving its ways, and her every action was deserving in equal parts of both condemnation and praise. In many respects, she and I were the same. though, in the most important respect, we could be no more dissimilar. Her wants rooted her firmly in the earth, and I had none whatsoever to speak of. Her estate reflected those wants in pure form. Some were obvious, like her wants for comfort and the plush carpets and pillows, safety within the guarded walls, and the simple quiet of the countryside far from the city. But others of her desires were hidden behind the illusions of her lavish wealth. I could find them in her library, where dust collected on 12,000 books she'd never have the time to open, in her chambers, where she seldom kept company and never for long, and in her conservatory, which was but a poor imitation of the bounty and wonder of a world she'd hardly seen. The conservatory was built on the northern side of the larger hill, where its glass walls would welcome all the light of the sun from dawn to dusk. Between its innumerable windows, narrow stone pillars supported vaulted domes through which, I imagined, the stars at night would shine, and the moons would be forever full. There was no place inside without light, even in the trees' faded shadows like water stains on the wooden walkway. The sun's rays refracted from its afternoon perch through the curved glass overhead, scattering in every possible direction. I neither felt the need to squint, nor could I relax my eyes completely. At the end of a serpentine path through the lush greenery, we came to an enclave where the Harthara stretched unceremoniously across a wicker couch. She was admiring the stooped branch of the blooming red fruit when her ear perked, and she turned toward us with a grand and genuine smile. To what do I owe the pleasure? It's good to see you, Avir. Come, sit. She gestured at the chair opposite. I sat without hesitation, and the servant who led me disappeared behind the trees from where we came. She tilted her head with interest, and her smile widened slightly as a fox's might, revealing a corner of teeth at once trusting and mischievous. It was a striking feature against the otherwise soft, maternal kindness of her face, an appearance which suited her well from dress to demeanor but never deluded me. I'm sure you have much to tell me, she said. I take it you received word of the virtue user in the Vazen. It was only a rumor. If I didn't know better, I'd think you sent me there to die. Pity the thought. Even I'm not fool enough to try to kill you. The Web has made her peace with you, and so have I. We're journeyers together, the two of us. So we are. If the Vazen didn't have your virtue user, I hope you didn't expect to find them on my lands, did you? Sorry to have to tell you after you've come all this way, but you'll have no better luck here. I met her eyes and said nothing. Behind her plump and youthful mask was a glint of awareness which told me she knew exactly why I'd returned, but she wished to be wrong. I'd never leave without the truth, and it couldn't be concealed forever. She laughed with a jovial throw of her arm, and she looked once more toward the red fruit. Well, I won't bother to ask what's really brought you here. I'm sure that'll be obvious soon. You're welcome to stay as long as you like, of course. I'm due to have guests for dinner tonight. I hope you'll pardon my lack of custom, but it's really better I don't clear the evening for you. Some affairs require my utmost attention. A plot against the king, is it? Her eyes widened briefly, but she reined herself in with another quick laugh. Oh, goodness, you make it all sound so dramatic. It's much less interesting, I'm afraid. There have always been pockets of resistance to the Selmarian, but it seems lately they're getting better organized. It's not entirely clear how they're gathering or what's uniting them, but they've managed to disrupt a number of valuable trade routes. Though they're not nearly as great a concern as the Haran, who changed their every business arrangement to avoid losing a single coin. I've hardly the mind for such sophisticated worries. She shook her head. There's no sophistication at all, that's the problem. A few wagons get whacked on a southern road, and suddenly all of Salobi wants to cut ties with the Ravan. They don't see the damage they'll do to themselves. They think because Warren sits above the kingdom, it's separate from it. But it's all connected. If the Ravan suffers for coin, so too will the Valar, and with it all those in Aramena who cling to the memory of once great Arsadea. If they think the Keshen were a hardy foe once, imagine how much worse they'll be when they've learned from defeat. You never saw the Keshen as your enemy. Please. She who makes an enemy of me is an enemy of coin itself, and she'll quickly find that's no way to live at all. She flashed me a knowing look. I've always wondered, Avir, do you consider yourself barely dead or barely alive? I don't consider it at all. Apologies. I'm sure most would think the inquiry insensitive. It's just, you've crossed my mind more and more of late, and I'm not entirely sure why, but I knew it must mean you'd be coming. For moons, I thought of all the things I'd like to ask you. I'm sure you'll make the time. Time to me is far less important than timing. You're quite right, though. We mustn't rush these things. Women of the Weva, such as ourselves, live to serve the world. How is your service coming along, I wonder? I heard whispers there was a man killed in Valis when last you passed through. He was unrelated. A trial of temperance. A moment of weakness. I see. She pursed her lips. I'm sorry to hear that. There's no doubt it was the world's will. Nothing you should fret over. I sleep without trouble. Good to hear. Then, who all are you yet to find? The moon dancer, the silver-tongued, and the Naroth. It sounds like the start to a strange parable. Well, had I information on their whereabouts, I'd gladly share it, but unfortunately even coin doesn't give me purchase on things of myth. I'll see what I can find for you. A personal favor, if you will. And you expect nothing in return? She shrugged. I'm ever grateful for the Weva's generous gifts. They're far more delightful when I haven't asked for them first. With the chime of a handbell and a rather customary dismissal, she recalled her servants to lead me back to the great house where I was to await the evening gathering of her wealthiest classmen. I sat patient and quiet in my room while they prepared another set of my clothes for the dinner, and I thought of the bizarre way she masked her lies with laughter, as though it were all a game. I knew, in her mind, it really was like a game. The whole world moved with consequences she could observe and influence, but which never affected her and rarely brought her any pain. What consequence she did suffer was at the hands of a mysterious and cruel fate, which she could neither bargain with nor understand. Of course, this too was only a playful lie she told herself, surely also while she laughed away merrily and pretended she was above those other commoner men who worried themselves over their monies, their virtues, and their lives. It was late in the evening when the guests were so numerous the servants could hardly keep their trays full for a single minute, and they dashed hurriedly through the crowd as anxious minnows back to their kitchen shoal. The wealthy patrons all ate and drank and laughed with reckless abandon, flaunting those glittering, shining things on their wrists and necks, which stood distinct from the restrained modesty the fashion of their stature demanded. Through a sea of muted earthen colors, not without its vermilions, its burgundy shimmers, and its bright emeralds, the same pattern repeated in the waves. A face and a name fondly recalled, a chortle unnaturally long, a hand on the chest in a backward tilt, a personal detail with a winsome gesture, humility and honors inseparable and insincere, and departing fair moons, while never straying from beneath the chandelier. Though honesty required that I speak only truth, among them temperance demanded I create no disturbance to their manners. I restrained myself from correcting them when they referred to me as the Har's niece. I said nothing when they spoke of the Fawn Ebbeth as my ailing cousin, and when they told me they were hopeful his condition was improving, I voiced only those common, empty words which meant hardly anything at all. May the Weva hear you. As the dinner gathering concluded its second hour with no appearance from the Harthara, it became clear I was unwittingly serving her purposes. It occurred to me when the first of the guests arrived and they regarded me as a member of the estate, a bearer of the Har's mantle. And when they came to me to inquire about my position, about my relationship with Thara, who they believed was my aunt, and when some of them even asked directly why my name was a new sound to them, I realized the lack of proper entertainments for the evening was no accident. Where usually she would procure music or a dance performance or some other exotic spectacle from places afar, tonight there was only a room of richness and gossip, and a strange woman with a braid and a scar to feed it. I admire your resolve, my dear, I will say that. I'd never have the courage to tie back my hair with a mark like that one, said the elder woman beside me, who heralded from a group of seedy remarkers beside a sculpture on the other side of the room. They watched us across the bustling sea, as though they could read our lips. Oh, pay them no mind, dear, she said. They're weeds, honestly. They'll rustle about anything that blows their leaves along. But even with that scar, you're a spring flower like me. I can tell. Am I? She smiled, amber in a carved bark. You've mastered something it took me sons on sons to learn the wisdom to: silence. You let them whittle themselves away with their rumor mongering, their speculating, while you hold the truth like a weapon. And inside, you're just burning to use it, aren't you? To put all these stuffy hogs in their places. She flashed a kind look to a middle aged man as he shuffled by us. I've no care for them, I said. Exactly, we've no care for them at all. Your mother's raised you well, never bow to these men. It's obvious I'm not saying anything you don't already know, but I wish when I was your age I'd had half your constitution. She gave a meager bow of the shoulders. Haranavadi. You must be Lurin's niece, Avir. A bold name these days. It was mine before there were stories. She sighed. My, we've come far from the Palarin days, haven't we? Sometimes I think we need a bloody tyrant again. Someone to cut through all this hosh-puck and put these frilly necks in their place. Palarin executed hundreds of wealthy nobles in her time. What makes you think she'd have spared you? I wouldn't blame her if she didn't. Maybe I just have a death wish. But I don't think so. I've always been wary of dying. Seems like it doesn't suit me, does it? I think the web is starting to agree. Give it time. Ha! Must be Lauren's blood in you, or maybe her sister's. I wonder if they're alike at all. Until today, I wasn't aware she had a sister. Where did you say you'd come from again? I've been traveling for some time. Can't really say I've come from any one place. Ever aloof, I see. I assumed from your hair you were from Aramena, especially given the Har's influence in the south. You wouldn't know anything about the goings-on of business there, would you? It's been some time since I last ventured there myself. Aramena's a peculiar concern for a northerner. Who called me a northerner? I'll have them strung. Laughter. Forced. Really, I concern myself with all the kingdom's affairs. The Valar is only on my mind today. It'll be the Sahora 10 tomorrow, and the Vazan the day after that, I'm sure. But I've been doing all the talking. What sorts of things interest you? I'm here to provide, however I can. Women of our virtues should look out for each other, you know. Bull Sumri and all that. Compared to yours, my interests might seem trivial. Things only children would concern themselves with. Look around. They're all smiling, laughing, and gambling as though a kingdom's fate doesn't rest in their hands. Whatever maturity their pursuits may once have had was drunk away sons ago. These men haven't a care in the world, and you shouldn't either. I pursed my lips. All right. Suppose I were interested in a thing of myth, then. For what? Historical value? What kind of myth? You're not another sorry fool who'd buy juice off a peddler to stay young forever, are you? I'd be very disappointed. A person of myth, actually. A Sen Quarren. She tilted her head. A Quarren? Now that's interesting. Even a child's eye can't be held for long with them. No one seriously believes immortal knights have been running about since the first king. I didn't say I believed that. I could get you time with a few Ilrin, perhaps even some council members. And the Ilra Ronsert in particular is... The Ilra Ronsert wasn't very helpful, I'm afraid. His mind isn't what it used to be. Grief takes a horrible toll on the soul. A shame. Beyond the Ilrin, I'm not sure how else to go about it, but I'll keep it in mind. I can't think the Weva intended nothing of our meeting tonight. Certainly not. She touched me on the shoulder with a gentle nod. Until next time, then, she said, and carried herself back to her associates across the room. Some minutes after midnight, the Harthara descended the stair from her chambers and joined her guests. Her entrance was subtle and short-lived, and after she met with a handful of her other classmen, she returned up the stairs beside her servant, Tavir, and she went to bed. I took note of the ones she spoke with, 7 in total. An older man with a narrow, pointed beard, 2 younger women, sisters, likely here on their parents' behalf, a middle-aged woman in a flowing wig who appeared to be an old friend, a nervous and apprehensive young man clearly unfit for the power he wielded here, and 2 companions who attempted, poorly, to stow away their romantic interests for one another in present company. It was difficult to glean any more useful information about their conversations. They were far from me, on the other side of the hall, and I suspected the Har intended to keep her business from my ear. She knew much more than she let on when we spoke in the conservatory. The Sen Quarren were more than storybook myth to her. The thread illuminated this much for me, at least. However, since then, it hadn't led me on such a straight course. Even now, in this crowd of strangers, my purpose should have been clear to me. It was as if the truth were stalling for something. Perhaps my sight of it waned because I withheld about myself from these strangers. Yet, I'd withheld plenty from strangers before without cost to my virtue. The thread moved strangely over their heads, wiggling and wobbling as though an earthworm unsure where to find the coolest soil. Where there was laughter, it bellied out and distorted. Whenever someone introduced themselves, it blurred, then sharpened to a fine point. And on the occasions when they were affectionate, when they would offer their hands or hug each other, the thread singed and fizzled like it was being burned. For perhaps an hour after the Har ascended to her bedroom, I tried to make sense of things while chatting idly with a man who seemed to show great interest in me for reasons I couldn't fathom. My attention was elsewhere completely. "And when you're not so busy with your traveling, what else fills your time?" he asked. I returned my focus to him for a moment. He crossed one arm on his chest, the other pillared beneath his chin. It seemed he fancied himself a philosopher. "I'm always traveling," I said. "I'm looking for someone." "And what kind of man are you looking for?" I frowned. "One who's joyful, one who's always honest, and one with strength like 10 suns." "You have pristine standards, but I suppose it's good you know what you want." "I have no wants. This is about purpose." "I see." He rubbed his chin and nodded thoughtfully. "And what is your purpose?" "It's not yet mine to know. It may never be." He nearly asked more of me when the old servant Tavir appeared at my side. In my ear he whispered, "The Har apologizes. She is unwell. Perhaps you'd like to return to your chamber before we call our guests' carriages." I nodded, and I excused myself from the young man, and I followed Tavir to my room in the Upper East Hall. A hot meal and a cup of spice awaited me inside on a hot table at the foot of the bed. "Venison with vegetables and plum from the garden," said Tavir. "The spice drink is only mildly potent, as the Har requested for you. Is there anything else you'd like tonight?" "No." He bowed and closed the door behind him. I ate and drank, and I undressed to my wraps, and I rested on the bed. It wasn't yet time for me to sleep, I could tell. Something in my mind kept me awake until I heard footsteps in the hall once more, and then a note slid under my door. I crossed the room and picked it up. It was sealed and folded neatly, and inside it read, "I know who you're looking for. Salobi, tomorrow night, where only one moon glows." The note was slipped here by a servant, I reasoned, meaning it was given to them either by the Har or one of her guests. But the Har had no need to leave the estate grounds to talk to me, nor did she need to send word in cryptic handwritten notes. Which of her guests had a message for me? Yet again, the thread of my virtue eluded me. Normally, it would have been clear who left the note, or at least what they wanted from me. It was hardly even an effort to draw pieces like this together. But tonight, it was as if something interfered. I burned the note in a lamp and laid back on the bed. Perhaps I was losing sight of something important. I needed only concern myself with the thread's path, no matter how strange. I would go where it led me when I woke, and I wouldn't think twice on it. It wasn't until I woke I realized I'd been dreaming in the night. I hadn't dreamt in over 10 suns, not since I saw the sacking again and again when I closed my eyes, and I left scars in my legs as I clawed away the terrors. After all these suns, the dream still didn't change, even though I had considerably. I was temperate now, and so I didn't let the heat of the fires or the orange haze cause my blood to rush. When the stone fireballs crashed through the pluming smoke and struck the walls around, I didn't flinch. The shards which came from my cheek, my shoulder, my arms and legs, I hardly felt them. I bled, unafraid. Behind me, I heard the crumble of brick and a building collapsed. The debris clouded as sudden and violent as the coughs which seized my chest. I swallowed, the salty taste of iron, dust, and blood, and I realized I was on all fours. My eyes seared and watered, and all I could make out was the gray of smoke and the red throbbing of my own head. "She's dead," came the thoughts, like they came from someone else, from a long tunnel into their mind. Look behind you. She's dead. I wasn't sick to my stomach this time. My neck wasn't stiff, and no part of me resisted the turn. I would see her body there, or rather, her arm reaching from beneath the crumbled doorway of what was once Audrigal's glass crafts, and perhaps still an emotion or many would flood my body. My mind was different now, and I knew as I turned to see Arin dead again that this time I would be unaffected by the sight. I'd accepted her loss a long time ago. The same simple dream wouldn't be enough to disturb me. But as I traced the familiar path through the rubble to her broken, lifeless hand, my eyes followed further, to where I saw for the first time her head and shoulders crushed under wooden beams. The stone fire's breakage shredded her flesh almost beyond recognition, her blood masking her in obsidian streaks against the bright flames. I was wrong. It wasn't her I saw in the ruin this time. It was another girl her age, with a pallor in braid and a deep, deep want for exactly this. In this dream, her wish had come true, I realized. As I looked to my hands, I saw they weren't my own. My fingers were longer, my skin was the wrong shade, and the hair before my eyes was too short. From Arin's eyes, I watched the horror I once wished for. If I could have done anything but cough and choke, maybe I'd have screamed. Nothing came from my throat but a hoarse whisper, barely enough to rouse me from sleep.